Welcome to First Time in the Ring, the podcast that helps make your first livestock project a little less overwhelming. If you ever wonder what you should be doing from the day that you bring home your calf to walking into your first show ring, this episode is for you. Today, I'm joined by Conley Schick, a Simmental exhibitor from Illinois who's been showing cattle since she was 4 years old. In this episode, we talk about building trust with your calf, halter breaking, and the supplies you'll actually need, and what separates good showmen from great showmen. Whether this is your very first calf or you're looking to improve this season, I think everyone can take something away from this episode. Let's get into it.
So my name is Conley Schick. I'm from Clinton, Illinois. I show Simmental cattle, and I've been showing since I was 4 years old, really. I showed my first time in a rookie showmanship at the Louisville Junior Nationals in 14, I think. But obviously I've been through the ring quite a few times, but my family raises and shows Simmental cattle. We're fortunate enough now to where we've kind of been keeping all of our show heifers back as donor cows and raising some bred nose that way.
Just to start, do you remember your very first livestock show?
Very first livestock show, I guess, I do remember. And I guess my first show that I showed at, I've been going to shows my entire life. I was going to shows in the womb, so I can't remember that, obviously. But my very first show that I showed at, legitimately, I guess, in the show and not just in showmanship, would have been a county fair in Carlinville, Illinois. I showed my heifer that we called Cutie, and I got second in class out of 3 at this little county fair, and I was overjoyed. That was definitely, I was absolutely in love with that heifer, and that just kind of kept growing my passion for showing. So ever since then, I've just kept getting more and more involved as the years go on.
Okay, moving on. So thinking back to, you've been showing your whole life, so you've been through all the ups and downs and everything else. What were some of the mistakes that you made when you first started?
So I think at first it's really easy to not work on showmanship practice as much as you should. And I do think that is one of the absolute most important things you can do just to get through the show ring properly. I was fortunate enough to have parents that did work with us, with my sisters and I and our calves on that a lot, but kind of when my mom stepped back from the barn, so I was even at an older age and it was just my sisters and I, we definitely didn't dial in on that as much as we kind of were beforehand. Because my first couple of years showing, we had a big enough space and my mom would pretend to be the judge and have us go through the ring and kind of do that just to simulate what being in a ring would be like. But then when it was just my sisters and I in the barn, I definitely think that's something we stopped working on to the same extent. And it's hard because when it's hot outside, you don't want to get calves out all the time and put them in the heat. But it's definitely crucial to how they show and look while they're showing. Because if you can't get your animals set up, it doesn't matter how good or bad they are, they're not going to be seen the same as they could be to the judge. Showmanship has such a factor in how you do in the show, I truly believe. And whether you set your animal up properly enough can really determine how you do in the show. So I just think showmanship practice and bonding with your animal and kind of forming that trust is so important to not only enjoying shows, because it's not fun when your animal acts bad the whole time in the ring, but ultimately doing well too. Showmanship is so crucial.
If I just brought home my first calf, what should I start doing with it to start working on showmanship?
So this is something I like a lot because I think the beginning days are so important when you first get a calf in a regular year. What I guess my family would do when we first get a calf home from a sale or something, we usually put them in kind of a 12 by 12 pen and we will just stand in the pen and scratch them. That is what we'll do for probably 5 days before we even do anything else. Just that animal letting it get to know you is so crucial. And we'll just stand in the pen, scratch on that animal with a stick, and then eventually a comb and just let them get more comfortable with you. I know before we even led this year's show heifer of mine, she was letting me kind of scratch her anywhere that I wanted to just because she became so comfortable with me. And then it makes that halter breaking process so much easier because they're already comfortable with you. They already trust you. They know that you've been doing nice things to them for these past couple of days, so they won't kind of act as miserable through the rest of the process. But
I know a lot of kids go through, and especially with halter breaking, they try to give up at the beginning because their calves just aren't working with them the way that they want them to. How would you start halter breaking, and what would you do if your calf is really stubborn?
So I think I'll first start with kind of tying them up, because one thing that my family has kind of learned that I do think helps a lot is getting that halter on them and obviously kind of letting them get the kinks out. They're obviously not going to like it at first, but one thing that we do is we'll put hay along a gate and just kind of let them walk up to the hay. And as they're eating the hay, we'll grab their halters with sticks through the gate, tie them up. And a lot of the times they won't even realize that they're tied up until the hay is gone. So that part is really nice because then they're tied and they don't even realize it. And they realize that it's a very painless process. In terms of halter breaking, I do think it's important that you start really slow. So a lot of times we want to get impatient and immediately just kind of start setting the calf up and walking them as far as possible like we would like to eventually. But I think really importantly, getting their head up, whether they're set up or not, and just scratching them and kind of showing them that they're doing a good job is very important. And then kind of messing with their feet and getting them to walk into it. So starting slow and having patience is so important. And it's really hard to find that patience sometimes because calves can be very frustrating. And trust me, I understand that. But finding that patience is really, really important to getting them to work with you and behaving down the road.
And then say, because you just brought your calf home, what are some of the essential supplies that you're going to need within that first 1 to 3 months?
So obviously feed is incredibly important. That's kind of standard feed and water. But in terms of actually working on that heifer, steer, whatever project it is, I guess kind of show box essentials that you would have. Ideally, like a hose and soap to get them washed and their hair clean on a daily basis. Now, don't soap them on a daily basis because that will very much dry out their scalp and hair. But what my family kind of likes to do is we have 2 days a week that we'll soap them. And that way their hair's getting clean regularly, but also they're able to kind of keep those oils on their scalp so they're moisturized and able to continue to grow hair. But when you're on those days that you're just rinsing for 15 minutes, it's important that you have some sort of sheen, whether that's sheen that you make at home with just some sort of oils that you can buy at Walgreens really, or you're buying clean sheen from Sullivan Supply. My family uses Show Coat, and that is kind of more on the expensive end, but with the level that we're showing at and knowing that we've seen it work, that's just ultimately what we like to use. There's definitely many options for sheen out there on the market, but then obviously to work that in, you'll need combs, brushes. I think those beginning stages, especially in those first 1 to 3 months, a rice root brush is really important. And a lot of times people think it's kind of old school, but ultimately that is pulling the dead hair out. It's also kind of rejuvenating their scalp well to get those sheens worked into their scalp. So fluffer combs are nice when they have long hair, but I think rice roots are fundamental and basic, but they do work. We really like a blue scrubby. That's kind of similar. It does a similar thing, but it helps their hair to pop a little bit more. Otherwise, I think that's pretty much the basics of kind of what we use on a daily basis. But
perfect. And then, so say I've had this calf for it's 3 to 5 months now, and you're really working with it, you're trying really hard, and you got to the point where you're kind of stuck. You don't know what else to do to grow anymore. So what separates a good showman from a great showman?
So I guess I have a pretty good example of this currently because right now my sisters and I have been dialed in for showmanship for junior nationals and state fair. And one thing that we always kind of try to do is set that animal up before they're released into their pen for the day, released into their run at night, and just making them stop and behave for whether that's 10 seconds or lately what my sisters and I have been doing is we will start a timer and make them do it for 2 to 5 minutes. And working up to 5 minutes is very difficult and it feels significantly longer than 5 minutes. 2 minutes can feel incredibly long. And those first couple times you try to do it with the heifer will take, I mean, it obviously depends on the animal, but we've had it take over an hour. So that is a long process, but I do think it makes a difference. That allows that animal to kind of learn they will be rewarded for standing still that long, for standing set up that long. And then hopefully they do the same thing in the show ring and behave that well when a judge is looking at them. But I think small things like that set you apart, whether you are doing it for that long or just 10 seconds, kind of knowing that animal knowing that they'll be rewarded if they behave the way they're supposed to really helps. And then I think in the show ring, kind of how good showmen separate them, or great, whatever you want to say, separate themselves. I think one thing that's really important now is I think from a time where really little eye contact is kind of drilled into us. And I'm not saying eye contact isn't important because I do think it is, but knowing your animal and having a better awareness of your animal, I do think is even more important. I find myself looking at the judge less and less the older I get because I would rather have my animal looking the part. And I think judges notice that. I guess with age, I've kind of noticed judges not prioritizing that eye contact as much, which may be more of a current thing, but I just do think it's really important. Having more of an awareness of your animal is kind of more crucial than really ever making that eye contact with the judge, even if you should try to, obviously, but that awareness is really important.
Yeah, I see more and more things where the younger judges, they really like whenever people make sure that their animals are set up and
absolutely, yes.
So you talked about how you were going to major shows and stuff. What's something you would do to prepare yourself for a major show?
So I guess for major shows, as I've kind of gotten older, my family has kind of pulled back on going to smaller shows to prepare for major shows. And that's difficult because a lot of times when you have a good animal in the barn, you want to take them out and win as much as you can. And yes, that's absolutely fun, but something we've kind of learned as we went along is kind of saving hair, saving that feed and fill and freshness in an animal is really important, so they're looking the best for that big show. And that's kind of something you have to learn as you go, obviously. And also it depends on kind of the level of the animal you have, obviously. But I think that's really important, but also just trying to make sure that everything's kind of 12 o'clock for that show. Because if it is a major show, we can kind of assume that's what your goal is to do well at. So ultimately feeding them properly and having them fresh enough, but also kind of full enough and in the right body condition for that show is really important. But I think just preparing as much as you can, doing all you can, and even sacrificing some other shows to be as prepared as possible is really crucial.
Okay, and then have you ever had a major setback or a really big disappointment while you were in the ring?
I mean, definitely there have been setbacks. I can think of truthfully many times where I haven't done as well as I want to. And it really stinks when it's with an animal that you've done well with. And then as much as you don't want to admit it, you kind of start expecting to do well, and you don't really want to go into the show ring like that. But ultimately, it's really frustrating when you do really well at one show and then don't at the next, and that's tough. And I think a really good example of this is my little sister Paisley's heifer from last year. We kind of showed her all through the fall and winter as a calf and knew her best days were going to be later on, but it was tough there in the beginning because we weren't sure that we necessarily had made even the right choice buying her. There were times where we were questioning, was this the right decision? Did we do the right thing? Because she got third in class at our Illinois Beef Expo. And obviously there was some other times that she didn't do as well as we wanted, but we just were going into summer kind of unsure of if we had the heifer that we wanted to kind of in the barn. And it all worked out, fortunately. She was third overall at Junior Nationals last summer. So going from third place to third overall is obviously a big jump, but just kind of shows like getting them ready for the right show, putting in all of that work at home, even after the setbacks. It can be really difficult. You can be unmotivated as ever before, but keeping your nose to the grindstone and kind of working as hard as you can, knowing your goals in mind, even with those setbacks, it's important you just keep working at it, even with the setback.
And then what's the best advice you've ever received?
This is, I don't know that this applies necessarily to everything, but I do think it applies to a lot of scenarios. And it's something my mom said a lot when I was younger, and it's just be where your feet are. I think a lot of us can get really, really busy and struggle to kind of be in the moment. But what be where your feet are means is that just having your head and mind where you are at in that moment is so crucial, because I think a lot of times we can be working in the barn, thinking about all the other things that we have to do that day and then rushing through it. And similarly in other situations, but it's kind of just ultimately so important to have your mind on where you're at. Don't be kind of wishing away time to do something else, just enjoying every moment. But yeah.
And then is there anything else you want to add that we haven't talked about?
I guess the biggest thing is showing livestock is so much about the work you put into it. I think we are such a hard work driven kind of industry. And I think it is so shown though in the show ring. Of course, you'll hear things about kids that don't do their own work, but so many of us do. And looking up to those people that are putting in the work that will take you so far, but just put in the work yourself. No matter the setback, it can get incredibly frustrating, but whether you do good in the show ring or not, you will become a better person for it.
And then if a kid is listening to this episode and they're about to walk into a show ring, what's one thing you want to tell them?
Be confident out there. My sisters and I always kind of tell each other, don't mess it up right before we go in the ring. And it's kind of our joking way of saying that we have confidence in one another as we go in the ring. But just reflect back on all the work you've done, know that you've put in the time and effort, and go do your thing, really, because this is the moment that you've been working up to for a while. Show everybody all the work you've put in and show that it can pay off.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Conley as much as I did. One thing that really stood out to me is that great showmen aren't Mayday. Taking time to earn trust with your animal, practicing the basics, and staying patient even when progress feels slow. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss any future conversations with experienced exhibitors from across the livestock industry. And if you know someone who's about to bring their first calf home, send this episode to them. It might save them a little bit of trial and error. Thank you for listening to First Time in the Ring. Remember, everybody has a first time in the ring, and every great showman started exactly where you are today. We'll see you in the next episode.